Do you think Shelter has a responsibility to put up deposits for private landlords' delectation? Do you? Well, if you do, I'd like to hear from you. 0344 499 1000. I won't say I'm against private landlords, but I've got Tamar looking through the window at me, wondering what I'm going to say next. But I did hear it on the news, and so did you. So if you've got a point of view on it. In fact, as a matter of fact, thanks to Tamar, let's be fair. The third hour may well be chosen by you. If you have a suggestion for what we should be talking about in the third hour, let me know. And if it's good enough, well, that'll stop Tamar coming into the studio. 0344 499 1000. You call us, we'll call you back. Needn't cost you more than a penny or two. You can email me through the website at talkradio.co.uk. You can text me at 87222, but text the word talk and then your message, and that'll cost you 25 pence plus normal sending charges. But tweet me for free at Talk Radio at George Galloway. Don't forget to at both of us. And a big thanks to the 450 or so backers of Killing Kelly, my film on the strange death of Dr. David Kelly. I'm hoping that by the end of this show this evening, we can get that up to 500 backers. What do you think? As a matter of fact, if everybody listening to me gave a couple of quid each, we'd have the mother of all documentary films. It's beginning to get under certain skins. I had a call from the Evening Standard this evening attacking me for not having the permission of Dr. David Kelly's widow for making this film. Imagine that from a member of the British press, the doorstepping British press. And in the last 20 minutes, I've just been attacked by The Guardian, a sports reporter, Barney Roney. If you're listening, Barney, you could always call up and explain it. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. We'll be talking Brexit, of course. The Prime Minister has laboured mightily, but has she brought forth a mouse? And is that mouse about to be trodden underfoot in the House of Commons? Certainly looks that way. It's very difficult to see how she can avoid the abandonment of between 50 and 80 of her own members of Parliament, although there is a time-honoured, dishonoured, you might say, tradition when these things are necessary. Knighthoods can be thrown around like confetti. They usually, for propriety's sake, wait for the Queen's birthday honours or the Queen's Christmas honours. But hey, one of the key votes in the Conservative Party in Parliament was this very day made a knight and his wife a lady. Imagine, 2018, the British unwritten constitution. You can be knighted at the Prime Minister's whim if she needs your vote. Well, I'm not sure there are enough knighthoods to go round all the Conservative rebels. And to be fair to them, I'm not sure that many of those rebels can be bought with such a bauble. And given that Labour is committed to voting Mrs May's deal down, it looks like a goner to me. Although that presupposes that there won't be enough Labour rebels supporting Theresa May to keep her in power for fear of precipitating a general election and getting their own leader in power. Yes, I know, it's perverse, but that is what we have come to. There are some, actually there are many Labour MPs that would rather have a Conservative government than a Jeremy Corbyn government. Indeed, their leader, Tony Blair, actually said so. His lips were moving. I saw them when he said that even if it were possible to win under Jeremy Corbyn with Jeremy Corbyn's programme, he'd prefer not to. So, if they take their cue, maybe they will make up for the Conservative rebels, but they'll never be forgiven in the Labour Party if they do, because one of the consequences, only one of them, of the Prime Minister's deal collapsing is that the Prime Minister is quite likely to tender her resignation. The Conservatives will hope to pick a successor and carry on well, I was going to say business as usual, but there's nothing usual about the business we have today. In this very week, the Conservatives accepted all of Labour and the SNP's amendments to their own budget. Now, that is unprecedented. I was in Parliament for almost 30 years, and I've followed Parliament for over 50 years, and I am unaware of any circumstance like that ever happening before. Just goes to show, if Labour and the SNP had been bolder with their amendments, if they had, for example, decided to, well, abolish universal credit or wreck other parts of the government's legislative framework, the Tories wouldn't have been able to stop them, because having lost the DUP, as at least temporarily they have, they were not in a position to vote down anything. That's the kind of government we've got in Britain at this juncture, this crisis juncture in our country's history in 2018. I don't know, maybe all the DUP will be made knights. Well, they like marching and stuff and dressing up. Why not? You never know what's going to happen. But the most likely thing is that the deal will be voted down. Theresa May will resign. A new Tory leader will try to convince Her Majesty that they can command a majority in the House of Commons, because only they can get the DUP back on board, and only they can get the 50 to 80 Brexiteer Tories back on board. But an unelected Prime Minister, another one, coming to power in Britain, may unleash forces amongst the public which force a general election before very much longer. I was looking in a shop today. I saw a pop-up idol of Jeremy Corbyn standing right next to the Queen. I tell you, it's getting closer, so close I can almost touch it. As for Brexit, it's a dead duck. There ain't going to be no Brexit, and let me repeat what I said last week. Some of you didn't quite understand it. Theresa May's Brexit deal is worse than no deal. In fact, it's so bad that it's worse than remaining in the European Union. So, in a referendum between Theresa May's Brexit and remaining in the European Union, I'd be voting to remain in the European Union, because we could return to the matter again at some time in the future, and we would not have voluntarily voted to be a vassal state of the Holy Roman Empire, which was, as I think Voltaire famously said, neither Holy Roman nor an empire, and the European Union isn't much better. So, that's how bad things are. If Theresa May's deal is voted down, as I confidently expect it to be, then actually, in theory, Britain does leave without a deal. But here's the rub. The reason some people were trying so hard to get little John Bercow out of the chair, and the reason others were trying so hard to keep him, was that he may invent in this constitutionless country of ours some device which precludes that. On paper, we're out on the 29th of March with a deal or without a deal. But as Bill Shankly famously said when told that on paper Liverpool should beat this team on Saturday, he said, but football isn't played on paper, it's played on grass. And what's that looming large now on the horizon? It's the Rock of Gibraltar. Who would have thunk it? The whole thing might now founder on the Rock of Gibraltar, inhabited by some Barbary apes and a very small number of Gibraltarians. And as luck would have it, one of them works here. You've just been listening to him. James Nish, the newsreader, is a Gibraltarian. So I'm going to interview him at the end of this monologue so that we can hear what the Spanish are demanding as the price of their supporting the Brexit deal. And if they don't support it, it ain't happening anyway. Who'd have thunk it? Everyone's eyes were on Ireland, one of our first colonial possessions. Nobody was looking at Gibraltar. We'll be talking in the course of the second hour about the Alston report. That's the one we touched on quite deeply, actually, last week. The UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty, who, to our everlasting shame, was roaming our country this time, looking at poverty in Britain. He has helpfully filleted his own report into different kinds of poverty. Last week we looked at child poverty. This week we're going to look at poverty amongst disabled people in Britain, of whom there are many millions, and most of them are living in dire straits, in penury. And we'll be looking at the Manchester Arena affair. The report by the Security and Intelligence Committee, a committee of trustees. You'd never find me on the Security and Intelligence Committee. They have looked at and concluded that the Manchester Arena atrocity, the slaughter of our innocents in Manchester just over a year ago, could and should have been stopped. Now, I have very, very strong views about that. Not only was I not a mile away from the Manchester Arena, not only was I living not a mile away from the terrorist maniac who incinerated himself and all those children and their parents, not only was I aware of the nest of extremists from whence he came, I have known for 20 years that they were a bomb waiting to explode. Britain sent the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, the clue was in the name, dear listeners, to Manchester, and they facilitated. Theresa May, as Home Secretary, gave them back their passports so they could travel to Libya to fight to overthrow Gaddafi, and then allowed them to come back and forth and back and forth. And one of the sons of that cell of the LIFG was the beast that murdered all of our children in Manchester. We'll be talking about all of these things, but coming up first is Dan, the Corbyn man, Dan Hodges, the Mail on Sunday columnist and political psychic. Now, Tamar's telling me I have to qualify that statement. You need to tell me, Tamar, in what way? Okay. No, he's making the fair point that Theresa May, did she or didn't she? The passports began to be given back. The control orders on them were removed by Gordon Brown, and the passports were given back to them by the Home Office when Theresa May was the Home Secretary. That's just a matter of fact. 0344 499 1000. That's the number to call. You can email through the website at talkradio.co.uk. You can text the word talk followed by your message to 87222, but that'll cost you 25p plus normal charges. Tweet me. It's free at Talk Radio at George Galloway. And don't forget David Kelly. It is Talk Radio. It is the mother of all talk shows, and it's not complete without Dan Hodges. For months, many months, we became good friends, albeit down a microphone. And he's been so busy, he hasn't been able to appear on the show recently, but I'm very glad to say he's back. He's Mail on Sunday columnist, of course, Dan Hodges. Dan, welcome back, sir.
Thank you for having me as ever, George.
Now, a very critical juncture. Let me seek your crystal ball. Is the deal going to pass the House of Commons, do you think?
I think it depends on how many opportunities Theresa May has got to get it past the House of Commons. I think at the moment it is looking a stretch, to put it mildly, for her to get it through first time around. I mean, the number of Tory MPs who have lined up to say they won't back the deal, I think, who have publicly said that, is now exceeded 80. Obviously, the DUP have said quite clearly they're not going to back it. I can't for
And
the
she
life.
can't give them all knighthoods, Dan, even though she gave one away today.
Well, she's given it a fair go. I can't for the life of me see how there will be anywhere like that number of Labour MPs who will come riding to her rescue, certainly first time around. So at the moment, it's very hard to see where the votes come from. But of course, we don't know what the impact will be on hearts and minds once that vote. If she does lose that vote, we then see the likely reaction certainly from the financial markets, the reaction on the pound, the reaction on the stock market, and crucially, as the spectre of a no-deal Brexit suddenly becomes very, very live. And then the question is, what would MPs do then? Would they dig in if they were given, a second opportunity to vote? How would they react then? I mean, I think that's the way things are shaping up at the moment.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because you're there a lot and I haven't been for a couple of years. But my understanding is that the default position is a no-deal Brexit. In other words, we leave the EU on the 29th of March with a deal or without a deal. But John Bercow does have some wriggle room, doesn't he, to try and put that to a substantive vote too. And if he did, of course, it wouldn't obtain one.
Well, that's right. I mean, although we are now getting into the area of sort of arcane parliamentary procedure, but it's absolutely right that it does seem that it will be at John Bercow's discretion whether or not to allow an amendment along those lines. The presumption is that John Bercow tends to do whatever he thinks is in the worst interests of Theresa May and the government, so there is an assumption that he would allow such an amendment. But I think the question is, even if the House of Commons were to, as it were, express its view on no deal, and were even to instruct Theresa May not to allow no deal, I'm not entirely clear still how that, legally, constitutionally, however you want to frame it, how that alters a no-deal scenario. The reality is, unless some sort of withdrawal agreement is signed off and ratified by the House of Commons by the end of March next year, then the reality is we do not have a deal. And unless there is an extension of the Article 50 deadline, then at that point we will leave without no deal, regardless of what the expressed view of the House of Commons is.
How could we extend the Article 50 timetable? Is that just a matter of a simple majority in the House?
Well, no. I mean, it would require a simple majority in the House, and obviously there are questions about whether that would be secured. It would also obviously require agreement from the European Union. Yeah. And my understanding is that there is no genuine prospect of the European Union extending an Article 50 unless it were to be framed in a way that it was allowing possibly the opportunity for a second referendum or the possibility for us to rethink our withdrawal from the European Union altogether. I don't think that the European Union, having gone through the process of negotiation over the past 2 years, having finally got to a deal, are going to look too kindly on any suggestion we should merely extend Article 50 to allow a sort of a renegotiation of something that they've already signed up to.
Quite. Now, Dominic Raab said today, something I said on here last Friday for myself, that for me, the Theresa May Brexit deal is worse than no deal, and it's so bad, it's even worse than remaining in the European Union itself. Now, he, of course, much more importantly, as the former Brexit secretary, has now said the same. Do you detect there are other Brexiteers who feel that way, that they'd rather remain in the European Union than to leave it on Theresa May's terms?
Well, I certainly think that as it were, the backlash against Brexit is now being led primarily by the supposed supporters of Brexit rather than the opponents of Brexit. I mean, frankly, they were amazing comments from Dominic Raab, not least given up until last week he was the person responsible for negotiating
Yeah, except he probably wasn't, Dan. I mean, he was titularly in charge. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he did. I mean, I do remember though we were all told about how he went on his late Sunday dash to Brussels to lay down, on Eurostar to lay down the law to the EU. So, I mean, there was certainly during the process. Mm-hmm. I mean, we were certainly being briefed that he was influential in the process. Obviously, it was only at the end we were suddenly told that he'd had the wool pulled over his eyes. But I think broadly, I have to say I'm slightly bemused by the Brexiteers' strategy. I mean, if people like Dominic Raab are going to go around saying, look, it's better off remaining than going with May's deal, then the reality is people are going to start to believe them. And we have got a situation now where I think momentum is starting to build for a second referendum. I think those who oppose our exit from the European Union, the so-called Remoaners, do have the wind in their sails. They do have the momentum. And frankly, if that's the strategy the Brexiteers are going to pursue, which is to say, well, if it's not, our pure Brexit, it can't be any Brexit, then I think they're going to have to prepare themselves for the consequences, and we're all going to have to prepare ourselves for the consequences.
Now, if there were, I know we're speculating, if there were, by the way, Lizzie tweets, George, please tell Dan not to predict anything we want to come true. I know I'm putting you on the spot and asking you to speculate, but if there were another referendum, I presume there could only be either two options or even just one option with a binary choice for and against. You couldn't really have a multi-option referendum, could you? You couldn't have a ballot paper that said, do you want to leave the European Union on Mrs. May's terms? Do you want to leave it on the terms of Jacob Rees-Mogg? Or do you want to remain after all? Because, first of all, that wouldn't lead to a clear outcome.
Well, I mean, I think this is one of the problems. I think I remember, there was huge concern and huge debate about the wording of the original referendum question. Given the panoply of options that we've seen, I mean, this is one of the things that interests me. I mean, we are told by the Brexiteers that there was a clear, decisive verdict for a particular model of Brexit, for a pure Brexit or a clean Brexit, is I think the phrase they use. But they themselves have tried out all sorts of variations. So we've had Norway, we've had Canada, we've had Canada
Super Canada plus.
Canada, we've had no deal. As you say, I mean, it's impossible to see how any or all of those options could be put on the ballot paper. I mean, one of the suggestions I have seen is you have almost like a two-stage referendum process. So the first question is, do you want to continue with Brexit? Do you want to remain? Assuming the vote is we wish to continue with Brexit, you then have two options. Do you want May's deal, or do you want to have no deal, or do you want to have May's deal, or Canada, or whatever? But I mean, we're getting into the weeds. I mean, I have to say, my view is at this point, if we ever get to the stage where there is a second referendum, it will inevitably be because public opinion has shifted so decisively that the politicians feel they are secure in backing a second referendum. And if it were to be that in that instance, I think the reality is we would be stepping back from Brexit. And I have to say, as somebody who voted Remain first time around, I think there would potentially be very severe consequences from that.
Yeah, sure. We'll discuss them maybe another day. I want to look at Theresa May now, and I'm grateful for your time. She told Sky, or rather she declined to tell Sky today, whether if our deal is voted down, she'll resign. But it's quite likely that the demand for her resignation, after all, this is her baby, would be, inescapable, don't you think?
Well, you would have assumed so. Although obviously we were all being told last week that the demands for a resignation would be inescapable, and obviously, that never came to pass, and those calling for a resignation were forced to retreat with their tails very firmly between their legs. I mean, in normal political circumstances, you would. I have to say, Theresa May I mean, we've talked about her resilience before. I mean, Theresa May strikes me as the sort of politician who will literally dig in until she's bodily, physically dragged from Downing Street. She does seem to have a determination to see this through, and the question remains: if she were to be replaced, who would replace her, and on what prospectus? And secondly, even if you remove her, how does that change the mathematics within the House of Commons?
Well, it gets the DUP. I mean, we reached the stage, as I said in my introduction to our item, that they can't even get their budget through. They have to accept amendments from opposition parties and so on. It does change it in the sense that the DUP can come back on board and the hard Brexiteers in the Tory party can come back on board if the new leader is more acceptable to both those parties.
They can do, but the question is, firstly, you would have had a Tory leadership election prior to that, in which I would assume that the candidate adopting the most sort of hard, aggressive stance towards the EU and with the strongest pledge, not to give a further inch to the EU would prevail. And the question is, what happens then? What happens?
No, accept
we
that,
have there is no, it seems to me, alternative of negotiating any sort of improved deal that would get past the House of Commons. We're then looking at a no-deal scenario. I know lots of people talk about a rerun of Project Fear, but certainly the ministers I've spoken to, including those ministers who themselves privately are not supportive of May's deal, many of them are frankly absolutely terrified of the potential implications of a no-deal scenario, what that would mean for the country, what that would mean for Brexit, what that would mean for the government. So that, simply ditching May, I mean, the reality is if ditching May was a solution to this crisis, she would have been ditched months ago.
Okay.
I'm afraid.
Well, here's a nice one. Here's a nice one for you, Dan, from Tony X. Nice to hear Dan Hodges on your show again, George. When he's not playing to the peanut gallery, he's an incredibly intelligent and knowledgeable man. There you go. I don't know what the peanut gallery is, but there you go.
I don't know what that is. That's
Take it as a compliment, my friend. Dan, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate your time. That's Dan Hodges, commentator for the Mail on Sunday on the Brexit imbroglio. Solid as a rock, referring, of course, to the Rock of Gibraltar, which has loomed out of the mist as a potential scupperer of the Brexit deal. But before I turn to that, I did tell you this was the College of Knowledge, the Open University of the Airwaves, and one of our very, very brightest of students is Tony X, the protest board, who points out, if you're still listening, Dan, the Corbyn man, that the Peanut Gallery was, in history, the area of the vaudeville theatre where the cheapest and rowdiest seats were. Top gallery, most noise, bottom feeders. It's absolutely brilliant, I must say. And Tom Jarvis says, George, can you ask Dan Hodges to predict Brighton to beat Leicester tomorrow? The Foxes desperately need the 3 points. Now, Gibraltar. Not many people live in Gibraltar, but one of them works here. And we get to hear him every hour with the Newsies. James Niche. James, welcome unfamiliarly into the interview seat.
Thank you. I was going to say, I don't think I like being on this side, but there you go.
Don't worry, I'll go easy on you. Now, not many people saw this coming, but Spain are now saying that they will scupper the whole Brexit process unless Britain accedes to their demands over Gibraltar. Do you know what these demands are?
Well, when you say not a lot of people saw it coming, I can definitely tell you that anybody who lives in Gibraltar, 32,000 people, by the way, that every single citizen would have seen this coming, because in history, Spain has always had this thing of throwing a spanner in the works at the 11th hour when it comes to Gibraltar. But I also think it's a bit of political noise for domestic consumption in Spain. Pedro Sanchez, he has regional elections in Andalusia, that's the south of Spain, that's coming up in 9-10 days' time.
All right.
I would imagine there's going to be a general election in Spain possibly next year. Pedro Sanchez has been accused of being soft on Gibraltar, of missing opportunities. So I think part of this is him playing to the gallery. That's only a part of it. The second part of your question, Spain cannot actually scupper the deal, particularly not on Sunday. It's qualified majority, so Spain doesn't have a veto for the withdrawal agreement or what the EU leaders need to agree. The problem, I think, George, here is that if Spain is unhappy now, it is going to be very unhappy after Sunday going forward. And when we get to the point of negotiating the trade deal and sort of further down the line, that's when they were given that veto in negotiations, because they say that basically Gibraltar cannot negotiate its own rights, that the UK is not going to be entitled to, and therefore they say, well, the UK cannot negotiate on behalf of Gibraltar. So for some reason, he thinks he wants Spain to. And that's very, very... I was going to say it's very odd. It's not surprising for the people of Gibraltar. But the bottom line here is it's a sovereignty dispute. Spain wants sovereignty of Gibraltar. That's the bottom line.
Yes.
And they've seen an opportunity.
Not an unreasonable demand when it is actually in Spain rather than in Britain.
And I knew you were going to ask me that. And I think that's a fascinating question. And for example, I have stronger arguments for this, but if we want to go down that line, why don't we talk about Ceuta and Melilla, the two enclaves that Spain has in Morocco?
I'd be happy to agree with you, but that's whataboutery.
Yeah, and I love it that you agree with me, George.
No, I do. There's absolutely no justification for Spain holding Moroccan territory and claiming that it's theirs. And equally, there's no justification for us claiming that Gibraltar is ours.
Well, I suppose we can look back at some of the referendum, some of the guarantees given by the UK. Gibraltar has been strategically important to the UK, particularly during the two world wars. So if we look at history and we look at the role that Gibraltar has played in history, very, very significant role. Throughout the years, Gibraltar has stuck through thick and thin with the UK. And I think it was the Chief Minister addressing Parliament on a Brexit statement saying that even at this difficult time for Gibraltar, the rock sticks with Britain. 1967, 99% of the people of Gibraltar voted to remain with Britain.
Oh, I've no doubt.
There was another referendum in 2002.
The Falklands issue. If you say that the people there are sovereign, then clearly they can remain with whomsoever they like. But, you know, there are powerful arguments that a piece of land that is attached to somebody else's country cannot indefinitely in the modern world claim to be part of a mother country, 1,000 miles away, 1,500 miles away?
Yeah, but you're talking of land only, and this is about homeland of a people. That is 2,000 people, and it may not be a huge number when it comes to the bigger picture.
16 times more than was in the Falklands at the time.
Well, there you go. And the people of Gibraltar have voted this. They've been given guarantees by the UK. So there is a double lock guarantee in writing that the sovereignty of Gibraltar will not be negotiated unless it's the will of the people of Gibraltar. Yeah. So I know that you can have arguments of sort of why we should or why we shouldn't. The reality is it's not going to happen. The people of Gibraltar have voted twice. Like I say, you know, we've played crucial and important roles in history. And to be quite honest, to say now that the people of Gibraltar don't deserve to be British or that the territory shouldn't continue to be British would almost be a betrayal of what Gibraltar has stood for in the past.
The people can continue to be British. It's the territory I'm
so
talking about.
So everybody has to leave?
No. They can continue to be British people living in Gibraltar, and a deal can be hammered out on that kind of basis. Anyway, as I have to see you and you me every hour, I don't want to fall out with you over that.
It's always a pleasure to give you my point of view.
Spain will not be able to stop Sunday, but as Mrs May's deal kicks so many things further down the road that need to be negotiated later, and those things have a veto that Spain could exercise, we're not out the woods yet.
Oh, no, we certainly haven't heard the last of it, George, but I'd definitely say, and as you open to the programme, Gibraltar will stand rock solid.
OK, James Nish, standing solid for the Rock of Gibraltar. What do you think? 0344 499 1000. You can email me through the website at talkradio.co.uk. You can text the word talk, then your message to 87222 if you've got 25 pence plus normal sending charges. Or tweet me at George Galloway at Talk Radio, as many people have, because we're talking about shelter and the spat that came up on the news right at the top of the show, where the Landlords Association were berating a charity shelter and saying that they should put up the deposits for private tenants. Now, we've got a caller, Natasha. Let's take that call. Natasha, welcome.
Hello, George.
Hi.
Hi.
What would you like to talk about?
So I just wanted to talk to you about Brexit. I've been wanting to speak to you quite a few times about this. You say that you would rather vote for Remain than for Theresa. Sorry, excuse me, I'm out of breath because I just run off the train. Okay, you're saying that you'd rather vote for Remain than for Theresa May's Brexit.
Yeah.
Why would you have thought that David Cameron's Brexit or any Tory...
Because I believe in Brexit. I wanted Brexit. I want Brexit.
But,
I would prefer a no-deal
Tories,
Brexit.
how could it ever be anything that we wanted? How?
Well, I'm a soldier of Mr. Benn, as you know, and he laid out over many decades the many reasons why we, people like him, people like me, are against the European Union. I'm not prepared to support Theresa May's deal because the only thing that it has achieved is an end to free movement of labour. It hasn't achieved anything else, and that isn't the main reason why I supported Brexit in the first place. I supported Brexit so that we could have a Labour
George,
Britain.
I understand why you supported Brexit. I honestly do. But what I don't understand is why you would ever assume that any Conservative government would be competent in delivering the Brexit that you would have voted for as a left-wing Brexiteer.
Well, there were variations, grades of what could have been achieved, and if we had a better Prime Minister, a better negotiator, if Jeremy Corbyn had been brought into the negotiation
Sure, but
team.
we had our referendum during a Conservative government.
Yes, that's true.
Right, so it was brought about as a gamble for David Cameron to hold on to his on to his government.
I know all of that, of course, just as you know all of what I believe. But the point is, the decision was handed to the people. The initial problem arose when Gina Miller won her Supreme Court case, which handed back to Parliament the sovereignty which we thought had rested with the people in the referendum. I said as soon as that happened that this gave limitless options for parliamentarians to wreck Brexit, and that was before Theresa May called an unnecessary general election and lost her majority. As soon as she had lost it, then we were in a very difficult situation, and that difficult situation has got more and more difficult. But my stance is clear. I would prefer a no-deal Brexit to Mrs. May's Brexit, and Mrs. May's Brexit is so bad, I'd rather remain in the European Union than support it. What about you? What's your stance?
Well, I would rather remain in the European Union than support any Conservative government's idea of what else we should do. You know, I do not trust them. I trust them less than I trust the European Union.
Really, I'm surprised at that. You know the kind of governments that are increasingly coming to power in the European Union. You know the mess they're in. You know what they did to Greece, to Spain, to Portugal. But you'd still trust them more.
More than a Conservative government in this country? Yes, I would. I really would. And I think another thing about what's happening now with Brexit, with all of this kerfuffle about, I mean, I agree with you entirely about the people's vote. I think it's, it's a massive smokescreen. What it's doing is it's preventing people from looking at anything else that's happening. Nobody's challenging the universal credit thing in any realistic, way of bringing it down. Nobody's mentioning the fact that United Nations has just investigated us for, and we've been found severely lacking in our treatment of human beings. Yes, I really do not think that this government is very high up on the list of people to be trusted in the world, and I would certainly put them on a par with the European Union.
On a par, you've now moved your position to on a par. I'll probably agree with you on that, but we are where we are. So if the logjam in Parliament cannot be broken, there is one obvious way to resolve it. It's the constitutional way, insofar as we have a constitution, and that is a general election that can elect a government with the confidence of the people and can command a majority in the House of Commons, don't you think?
Absolutely, 100%. Yes, George, I agree with you about that.
OK, Natasha, thanks very much for that call. A spirited one to kick us off. Marie McFarlane, my old friend in Scotland, says it's absolutely true that we have to raise deposits for private rented property. Just check out councils all over Britain. Private landlords' deposit protection schemes. Well, maybe I wasn't clear enough in what I said. The Landlords Association was saying that Shelter should put up the deposits from their own funds. Tom Jarvis says, no, I've done that one. Tony has explained what the peanut gallery is. Scouser Lar says, I believe this was the Brexit plan all along. Bring back a deal so bad that people would rather stay in the EU. Tony says, George Galloway, this is to Barney Ronay. Sounds very exotic, Barney Ronay. He's a sports writer on The Guardian who attacked me just before I came on air for making this film about David Kelly. So, Tony X has written to Barney Ronay, saying, George Galloway has just on air invited you to phone in and talk about your issue on his live radio programme. Will you? 0344 499 1000. And Patrick Vidine says, I've been thinking about the options on a second referendum. It is a further opportunity to screw the people if the format is not just and precise. It's a minefield, but I think it's the only legitimate way forward to check with the electorate. Yeah, I agree, Patrick, with a general election. And the Communicipalist says Theresa May's deal is the impossible option cooked up with the EU to force either complete Brexit capitulation or a second referendum with the same result. It's the default EU strategy to subvert referenda results, as they did in Denmark and in Ireland twice. Well said. Ford says, you know the weird thing, George Galloway, this was always on the cards that we would have another referendum. Personally, I don't see any other way out of this Brexit shambles. I say general elections another way. And this from Peter. Georgie, if you saw inside the civil service on Monday, aired on the national state propaganda channel, the BBC, you would have understood that it's not politicians or ministers who are in charge, but the establishment. Boris Johnson came across like a child being told what he could and could not say as Foreign Secretary. The deep state is alive and well and trying desperately to stop Brexit. I'll be back with the second hour quite soon. Now, with all due respect to my colleague James Nish and to any other Gibraltarians listening, I think it is a Ruritarian fantasy that we can possess a rock which is attached to somebody else's country. I felt the same about the Falkland Islands, but at least you had the excuse that they were islands, and islands quite far away from the mainland that claimed them, namely Argentina. It's a Ruritarian fantasy that we can go on possessing a small part, 6 counties, in the northeast of Ireland. I believe in divesting ourselves of all these Ruritarian fantasies, like Anguilla, Bermuda, the British Antarctic Territory, the British Indian Ocean Territory, the British Virgin Islands, the Cayman Islands, the Falkland Islands, Gibraltar, Montserrat, the Pitcairn Islands, St. Helena, Ascension and Tristan da Cunha, clues in the name, South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands. Not to mention the Turks and Caicos Islands. I'm against it all. That's just my point of view. Tell me yours, 0344 499 1000. And if Britain refuses to give sovereignty over the land of Gibraltar back, Spain would be absolutely entitled, when it has a veto on our future relations with the EU, to veto them. That's my point of view. Also, 0344 499 1000. But we're also talking about Shelter. I just heard a fellow on the news say that Shelter was giving private landlords a bad name. It's like being told to sit up straight by the hunchback of Notre Dame. Private landlords, nobody needs to give them a bad name. They have a name as bad as journalists and members of Parliament, by and large. And just like in the case of journalists and members of Parliament, there are honourable exceptions, but they are exceptions to the rule. And the very idea that shelter, which has done more to highlight homelessness and the problems faced by hundreds of thousands of families in this country. I saw on Twitter today, it's reached a record. It's like 1/3 people are literally homeless in Britain. And that's shelter's fault. To be fair, it isn't private landlords' fault either. It's the state's fault. What is a state if it cannot guarantee a roof over the head of every person living in it? And I'm sorry I keep saying I told you so, but I did tell you so. When Margaret Thatcher ordered councils to sell their council housing stock, I told you this is where it would end up. That all of the best public assets would be bought by the sitting tenants at knockdown prices and would quickly find their way into the hands of private landlords. And that is exactly what has happened. And I'm a believer in council housing. I still remember the day I got one. I still remember the smell of the paint and the wood. I still remember the glory of not having to queue up on a stair with 6 other families to share an outside toilet. I still remember not having to take a bath in the kitchen sink or scullery sink in the slum in which I lived. I remember the glory of having a bath with a plug. I remember the glory of having a garden, front, back and side in my case. Council housing is the best form of tenure. Why? Because you get to elect your landlord, unlike if you're a tenant in the private sector. Callum's on the line in Cardiff on this very subject. I better hear what he's got to say. Callum, welcome to the show.
Hi, good evening, George. How's you doing?
Good. Nice to hear from you, sir.
Yeah, I'm a private housing enforcement officer with one of the councils in South Wales.
Oh, yes.
I wanted to give a bit of insight.
Yes, please do, yeah.
A couple of things. So Shelter does some great work, and the landlord association is actually quite good as well. It's not, you say private landlords get a bad name, but generally the problem generally, as I see it, is a lot of companies set up, and what a lot of companies will do is instead of buying one house for say 100 grand and then putting one tenant in it for say 550 a month, what they'll do is buy 4 houses as a business strategy, a rock bottom price, say 25,000, and they'll stick somebody who's generally on housing benefit into the house. And it's like a farm of bad housing. Mm-hmm. That generally is a lot of the reason landlords get a bad name is because these big companies will buy a lot of bad housing, and then, well, it's not a very good business model if you actually improve the housing.
No, of course not. I mean, even if they were kind-hearted Christians going to church every Sunday, their purpose in buying the property is to make the most profit out of it that they can. And that means charging the biggest rent that they can and spending the least amount that they can on maintaining and repairing the house, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd also say one of the main problems I see with homelessness isn't lack of council provision. It's council provision generally going to people who work the system. So I'll give you an example. If you're in private rented accommodation and you trash your house in any different ways, so say you remove different pieces of the boiler constantly and keep saying the boiler's broken, what eventually happens is you get served upon, and most councils run a system or most council housing associations or council housing is run on a points-based system based on need. So as soon as you actually get a service against your house, either that could make you homeless, or means there's something wrong with your house, or means you will be homeless because of your house, you jump up a ladder.
Yeah, but that's only an issue, Callum, because there are so few council houses.
Well, yeah, I would agree and disagree with that. So generally, the main problem Britain had before 1940 and a lot before that was, if you remember back about 100 years ago, people would generally live in a front room of their parents' house. People wouldn't be able to afford their own housing. Then after World War II, they block built a lot of unsuitable. Some of it was suitable, some of it stand the test of time, some of it got repurposed, but a lot of so-so housing was mass-produced council housing. Now, when a lot of council housing got sold off, it generally was a good thing. It brought a lot of people to become homeowners, but then it also left a big gap in council housing in terms of supply and need. The problem I generally see is not really cost efficient by area. So, for example, in the centre of London, you may house someone who's homeless in, say, a one-bedroom of a bed sit to keep them close to their family, but it's in the centre of London, so it's exceptionally expensive. Whereas, say, in the valleys, you'd get almost a whole year for what you'd get for 1 or 2 months in the centre of London. And there is a cost element of it that has to be factored in when debating. Now, when they sold off council housing in London and other expensive areas, it made no sense. Generally, it's become a lot worse of a problem because we're sat on a housing bubble, and the bubble is making it so hard for people even to raise the deposit to get on the ladder that companies like investment firms from China and other places abroad, this is generally one of the main problems with London, will purchase new housing before it's even made.
Yeah, and oftentimes it's never lived in. It's being purchased merely as an investment, often with hot money, sometimes with very dirty money. And London is plagued with this. When I ran to be Mayor of London, I had a very comprehensive strategy for that. The current Mayor of London has done something about that. All the candidates to be mayor recognise this as a major issue because the land is being purchased, the houses are being built, but nobody then lives in them, or in some cases, hardly ever lives in them. On the other hand, the year I ran to be Mayor of London, there were 76 council houses built in the entire Greater London area. 76.
Yeah. The general problem I see with council housing is when you're talking about homelessness specifically, you realistically just want a roof over people's heads.
Well, that's the emergency need. I mean, you could put them all in some of the, in the case of London, you could put the homeless people in unoccupied business property. It would at least be out of the cold and out of the rain. But that's only an emergency.
But there's a big trade-off. When you actually build housing that's meant to be occupied, there are a lot of costs that come from building regulation.
What's the solution then, Callum?
Well, there's a couple of things that could be done. In general, council housing will bring down the amount for rent because landlords won't be able to charge as much because there'll be a better and a cheaper alternative.
Indeed.
But generally, I think that councils need to look at a strategy of where you make exceptions to building regulation where there is a homeless demand in the area. So repurposing office blocks, for example, or using housing that doesn't meet the standard just to get roofs over people's heads, because that generally, it's not a great solution, but you are talking about a cost-effective way that could actually solve a problem.
Okay, Callum, in Cardiff, that's kicked off the issue of shelter, and shelter giving the private landlords a bad name. Still calling Barney Roney of The Guardian, who attacked me for making this film about David Kelly. I'm still 43 backers short of my target by 10 o'clock. Please, everyone out there, give a pledge, however small. Hassan Diwan says, how can Jeremy Corbyn become PM unless the Tories lose their majority? Well, he can become Prime Minister of a minority government. There are many such examples, including many such examples of minority Labour governments. If Jeremy Corbyn could persuade Her Majesty that he could put together a coalition that would have a majority in the House, then he could be given the opportunity to become Prime Minister without an election and then seek to have a majority further down the line, Hassan. Now, Sean Caden says, I've never heard anything as preposterous as the National Landlords Association criticising shelter just when you thought you'd heard it all. They could fix it tomorrow. That's what the NLA spokesman said about shelter. We're trying to get both the NLA and shelter on the line to help us with this discussion. But Sean asks, is he having a laugh? I think probably not. And Ryan says, how can anyone dare say they currently feel sorry for Theresa May? The UN finds the UK discriminates against disabled people. 120,000 austerity-related deaths. Grenfell, the Manchester Arena, 14 million people in poverty. Sorry, not I, says Ryan. Jamie's on the line. Let's hear from him. Jamie, welcome.
Oh, hi, George. Good to speak to you.
And you, sir, what would you like to talk about?
Well, I'm quite frustrated. I am a Brexiteer, so I have a bias to my argument.
Mm-hmm.
But what gets me is that if you go back to the referendum, go back to the mainstream media propaganda, all three parties basically saying you must not go because you're going to die if you do go. It was spelt out that we're leaving. We're leaving the single market. We're leaving the customs union. We're leaving. End of story.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I mean, in the absence of anyone saying any different, leaving is leaving. It doesn't mean half remaining or 3/4 remaining or 7/8 remaining, actually.
So somehow the elite has managed to basically use the tool, i.e. the mainstream media, to essentially rebrand what leaving means.
Yeah.
And they're calling that no deal. And then they're defining that rebranding as it is the end of the world, worse than Project Fear you had to begin when you kicked this ridiculous story off.
Mm-hmm.
I'm absolutely convinced if you had a referendum, a proper referendum, not a BS referendum where you essentially are comparing, well, do you want to stay in or do you want to have this wretched deal from May, which is not a deal, it's not a Brexit in any way, shape or form, then, essentially you're basically... No, I've lost the phrase. But I'm
no, well, I mean, if that happens, I'll be fighting for Brexit.
Exactly.
But we've had a number done on us in the mainstream media. It was thought that Mr. Murdoch was against the EU, but the Times and many of his other media interests, Sky in particular, have been Remainer bastions. It was believed that the Mail was pro-Brexit, but the change of editorship at both the Mail on Sunday and the Daily Mail has put the Mail newspapers into the Remain camp, the Theresa May Remain camp. The BBC was always in the Remain camp. The whole of the deep state, the whole of Whitehall, and most of Parliament is in the Remainer camp. And the leaders of the Brexit campaign, no names, no pack drill, put on their straw hats and went off partying, thinking that the victory was won. UKIP opened the gates for the barbarians. We've now got the absurdity of Tommy Robinson, a spokesman for UKIP. It's now unfit for purpose. No, he's an advisor. Oh, he's only an advisor, Tamar tells me.
George, that right-wing nationalist way of thinking will basically... This is the beginning. If the Brexit gets trashed by the elite and we end up with some fudge or worse than staying in, that right-wing nationalist populist movement will basically bite us. in the same way as America is experiencing.
I agree with
Trump.
that, yeah.
It's exactly the same thing.
It's the biggest boost. I mean, if they were designing a scenario to propel them to more power, this would be it.
Yeah, definitely.
You tell 17.4 million people you've been betrayed.
But I have a plan. I think you've got May basically going to be spending, I don't know how many millions of more pounds on top of the £9 million leaflet nonsense to basically come and sell this ridiculous. I mean, I just cannot believe she has a straight face when she utters the words that she does, because nobody in their right mind can believe what she is talking makes any sense to man or beast. It's ridiculous. So I think what needs to happen, there's two things that need to happen. One, the Leave camp need to get together. It shouldn't be, oh, Farage is a bad guy. He's really awful. We won't work with him. This guy was the one who's basically spearheaded this whole opportunity.
Yeah, but he's just an individual now. He's not. He doesn't hold any position.
No, I know, but you've got to basically work out where the prize is there. You've got to get all the people together, all the orators, you, Farage, all these, Boris Johnson, everybody in the same room singing from the same tune, telling the people how it is. Trade deals are not an issue. If we leave Europe tomorrow, we could decide to basically say, I'm not going to tax any of your goods coming in. We'll just take them, not going to put any import duty on it whatsoever. They could choose to be idiots and basically put duty on our stuff, at which point we say, hang on a minute, what are we taking from Europe? I can get that from China. I can get that from America. And by the way, I can create my own.
Or even better, we could make it ourselves.
I think that's exactly right, George. We should bring the jobs back home. That's bringing the jobs back home. Bring in the actual products that we could easily do ourselves.
Now you're talking. Now you're talking, Jamie. Thanks very much, my friend, for that call. Steve is in Ipswich, and he is a private landlord. Stevie, thanks for calling. I hope I haven't upset you.
No, not at all.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I've been a private landlord of HMO multi-lets and separate flats and stuff since probably around 2000. And I think I'm a pretty fair landlord. I've had some tenants for 10, 12 years. So I would imagine if they didn't like living at the houses I have and the properties, they wouldn't stay there. I would have said, yeah, Shelter do a very good job. I certainly wouldn't criticise them. But also, I would also say that private landlords get a very bad name, and for not really a good reason. I mean, I've had way more bad tenants over the years than I can even count on two hands. People that have wrecked properties, people that have decided to bring their families to live with them when it's only single tenancy, people that have stolen. I've had rapists, murderers. You couldn't even make, if I wrote a book about it, you'd probably not believe it. But I've still tried to make sure my properties are decent, clean, well heated, well lit, safe, fire alarmed, etc., etc. And I would say, by and large, 90% of my tenants have been very good and very nice people. But as the guy from Wales said, it's not unusual for tenants to think they can just wreck your place. And I know it happens to council properties too, because I've got friends that work for councils and go around and repair these places. And by and large, as much as we need some of these properties, councils aren't doing it. Private landlords are supplying a need. And if they do need a bit of help, and whether it's Shelter or somebody else, personally, I can't see a problem.
Well, but, I mean, you can't ask, Steve, you can't ask a charity, Shelter, to pony up deposits to private landlords. But that's what the NLA just called for.
Well, that's stupidity, and that's obviously going to make the headlines. But I would think most private landlords would agree with me. You know, tenants struggle to come up with proper deposits. I mean, forget getting 3 months deposit out of somebody to start off with. I don't even bother with that anymore because it's unrealistic. You know, if you get a month out of somebody, that's probably the most you're going to get. And if you try for more than that, you put them in mainly financial difficulty. So you have to be realistic, charge a realistic rent, and be realistic about what you're going to take as a deposit if you take one. Because, as you said, Shelter can't be expected to pay it, nor any charity. And at the end of the day, the need is there for private landlords. We've got to be reasonable, and I think I am one.
Well, Steve, I'm grateful to you for laying all that out. That's the good private landlord side of the story, and it's only fair that we have showcased it. Jane A. says, a friend of mine's son obtained a housing association flat in a popular area of South London. They want people with good salaries. They are businesses now. Indeed, they are. And Thomas Cooper says the Manchester bombing was caused by the Conservative government. And Councillor James Ball says, disability poverty in the UK. The government's rolling cover-up of tens of thousands of deaths of those past fit for work on the ESA work-related activity group and suicides amongst this group is the most heinous crime perpetuated by the Tories. And Tyler Durden says, Tamar strikes again, corrects George on the Libyan jihadists, facilitated by Theresa May. I'll not read the rest, Tyler, forgive me, I've got to work with the man. What a strange world we live in. Hey George, Gibraltar isn't in Spain. By your measure of thinking, Portugal is also in Spain. Gibraltar, as well as the Falklands, are territories of the British. Stop selling out your own people. Well, first of all, Spain and Portugal have agreed that they are Spain and Portugal. Spain has never agreed that a rock that we took by force is ours. That's the difference. And now, as to selling out my own people, I'm not selling out anybody. If somebody in Gibraltar wants to be British, I'm the last man to say that they shouldn't be. As a matter of fact, we need new people in this country, especially when we leave the European Union. So for me, they'd be welcome to come here. They'd even be welcome to stay there with their British passports, living in Spanish territory. You get me? There's lots of people doing it. In fact, much of the Spanish costas and the Algarve in Portugal are inhabited by precisely such people, British citizens living in somebody else's country. Peed off says Gibraltar's just a piece of land attached to Spain, ? Same could be said about Northern Ireland or the Gaza Strip. Tut, tut. Well, I did say it about the north of Ireland. That is a piece of land attached to somebody else's country, and it should be given back. I'm not allowed to speak about the Gaza Strip. Denny says the Rock of Gibraltar is much firmer than Mrs. Maybe's weak and porcine government. Well, a blancmange is much stronger. David Leviscont says homeless population is going up by 1,000 each month. 1,000 a month. Lean Liam says, would you please wish my husband, Hassan Diwan II, a very happy 40th birthday? Thank you very much. I do. Is that the Hassan that I answered earlier? Whether it is or whether it isn't, Hassan Diwan II, I wish you a very happy 40th birthday. I remember my own 40th birthday only too well. Though it was a few years ago now, though the wife thinks I'm 45. Bob Justice says, if some of the 184 Labour MPs that facilitated savage Tory cuts vote for May's deal, it's the death knell of caring liberal centrist credibility. Hashtag Alston Report. Hillary, that's Hillary Clinton, I think, rather than Hillary Benn, just exposed this liberal hypocrisy stateside. Will we have the British version? Well, I think if that happened, Bob, it would bring about the organic severance of these people from the Labour Party. I think if there was a substantial Blairite rebellion which kept Theresa May in power and voted for her no Brexit deal, that would probably bring about an actual cleavage in the Labour Party. John says the Landlord Alliance has no courage to question Tory governments. Universal credit not paid directly to landlords. Now, just when you thought it was safe to get back in the water, Doogie in Wolverhampton is on the line. Doogie, am I happy to hear from you? Go ahead.
I'm in Russia today, George.
Are you? My goodness. You've been in East Beirut, you've been in Jerusalem, you've been in the West Midlands, and now you're in Russia. What are you doing there, if you don't mind me saying?
Firstly, I'd like to apologise because I swore at you the last time I called.
Don't worry about it. Consider it in the past.
But the point I want to make, that I want to ask you, you are a Brexiteer like me, like Nigel Farage. Why do you want a Labour government that stood on a leaving the customs union and leaving the single market manifesto, and they stood on that? You want a Labour Party that have backtracked on it. So I'm confused.
I don't see why you should be confused of Russia. Which part of Russia are you in, by the way?
Yeah.
Dougie.
Go on.
Yeah. Which part of Russia are you in? I'm
Moscow.
just interested. Okay. Confused of Moscow. Let me explain. Jeremy Corbyn's Brexit plan is not to remain in the customs union.
He's backtracked on it already.
Let me finish, Doug. It's not to remain in the single market. It is to negotiate a new customs union with the European Union. And what's wrong with that? We just heard it from a previous Brexiteer on the line just 10 minutes ago. If we don't put any tariffs or barriers on them, and they don't put any tariffs and barriers on us, and if we can go to their countries without a visa and they can come to ours without a visa, hey, that's a customs union. What's wrong with it?
George, you know yourself that the Labour Party have stated publicly that they want to stay in the single market.
No,
he keeps going on about it.
Who said that, Dougie? Who said
Jeremy
that?
Corbyn?
No. He's never once said he wants to stay in the single market. He wants to stay in a new arrangement with the European Union, and so do I, and so should you.
Define a new arrangement. Define it.
I've just done it for you. No tariffs or barriers on them. No tariffs and barriers on us. Visa-free travel between them and us. There's a deal. Why not?
You can't make free trade agreements if you're in the customs union.
If you're in the customs union, if you're in the customs union, you can't. But if you negotiate a new one, in which you're perfectly free to do so, why wouldn't you want to?
George, it's baloney, and you know it is.
No, I don't.
Do you honestly think that Donald Trump would have paid 40 billion quid, like we are, to get nothing?
Well, that's what we're doing under your beloved Tory party. We're paying 39 billion.
I'm not beloved Tory party at all. I'm a Farage fan.
Well,
I think if Nigel Farage had been given a job in the cabinet to negotiate, we wouldn't be in this mess. Because he knows what the EU's like.
He's not up for election, and the only choice at the next general election is a Tory government or a Labour one. And it sounds like you won't be voting for the Labour one.
No, and I won't vote Tory. I'll never vote again, George. Never.
Well, that is a problem. That is a problem. You're right to identify it. I had a young man on my TV show goes out tomorrow on Russia Today, Dougie, Patrick Christie's, in which he says, why should I vote again ever? Because my vote, when it won, was never implemented.
We were all told, George, all of us, by Cameron, Osborne, the lot of them, all the big hitters, that if we voted to leave, we left the single market and the customs union. We were all told it. We were all being terrified on the television, on the radio. We were told that was Brexit. And people voted to leave the customs union and the single market. I don't want this dilly-dallying, we've got to stay in this, we've got to stay in that. They terrified people, and the people still voted to leave it.
That's right.
And this is what I don't get with Labour. I don't get it, because they stood on a manifesto.
I don't know why you're prioritising Labour for your ire.
Yeah, I am.
It's the Tories that have done this deal. Why on attacking Corbyn rather than attacking May?
I think May's a waste of time, and I also think Jeremy Corbyn is as well. I think the pair of them
but
are.
if we analyse this conversation, you've spoken almost entirely about Labour.
Yeah, because George, he's backtracked. He stood on a manifesto.
So did the
saying
Tories.
that we would leave.
So did the Look, 80%, more than 80% of the British people voted last year to leave the European Union. Just last year.
I've said this to you before. Who was tied Theresa May's hands in all of these negotiations? It's the 133 Labour MPs that sit in Leave constituencies that constantly voted against her when she was trying to get us a good deal. It's the Labour.
You think she was trying to get us a good deal, or do you think she was trying to sabotage the whole thing?
Theresa May never wanted to leave.
Well, quite. But you've exculpated her from that.
We should have gone. We had strength. We're the 5th biggest economy on the planet. And yet the Labour Party, for some reason, since 133 MPs, George, I keep hearing that there's not a majority in Parliament for a no deal. There is. If the MPs hold their hands up and vote the way that their constituencies voted. I keep hearing, it's about jobs, it's about this, it's about the other. It's not. We were all told we were going to be skint and the world was going to end, but we still voted to leave.
All right.
And them MPs should, and they should have gone with the Tory party to try and get us a fantastic deal. But all the infighting and party political point scoring, that's why Brexit will never happen now, in my opinion.
Well, mind how you go in Moscow, Dougie. Give them my regards and wrap up well. Thanks very much for the call. It's good to have you back. John says, no, I've done that one. Let me do one more before the break. Scouser Lar says, I'd rather listen to Tama than listen to Dougie. Dougie makes my ears bleed. He gets around though, doesn't he? Eastern Beirut, Jerusalem, the Black Country, and now he's in Moscow. I wonder what he does. He's not one of these bots, these Russian bots, is he? Charlie Fay Colross, you keep talking about a possible general election for Labour to take over the reins, yet you never mention the 40 plus, going by the latest polls, Scottish SNP MPs that will clearly be needed to crown Jeremy. Why, Sturgeon has the most credibility of all the party leaders, yet she wants Scottish independence. But she certainly doesn't want the UK to go down the pan, no matter what the unionists say. And Terry Eaton says, George, I agree with your caller from the train. The Tories cannot be allowed to have more time to wreck this country. A general election is needed. And Kov says the second referendum won't be about the EU. It'll be about democracy and the ongoing pursuit of freedom. Watching Theresa May reverse engineer her alibi sickens me. And Keith says new Labour MPs benefited from the fraud of PFI hospitals, schools in their areas, which are still being paid for, yet not a word since built under EU procurement. So as with May, they want to remain. And Eva Working Class, the working class poet, says a home should never be an investment opportunity. This is the madness of the capitalist market. People need house prices to rise at a time when people are living on the streets. And Louis Richards says, I have never, ever heard Dougie talk sense. All he does is drag Labour through the mud. Ridiculous. Let me take a break for some capitalist messages. 0344 499 1000. As you know, we have been digging away at the report of the Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, which Philip Alston, the UN Special Rapporteur, has compiled. And we hope to have him on the show next week. It's Thanksgiving or something like that in the United States this weekend, and he couldn't be with us. But we did last week talk about child poverty. Tonight we want to talk about the poverty being suffered by disabled people. Philip Conley is the Policy and Development Manager for Disability Rights UK, and he's kindly agreed to join us on the show. Philip, thank you very much for that.
Thank you for the invitation, George.
What's the scale of poverty amongst disabled people in Britain? In what way does disability, apart from the obvious, make people even more poor than they might otherwise have been?
Well, we do know something of the scale of the problem. Half of all the households in the United Kingdom living in poverty have a disabled person living within them. And we do know that 2 in every 3 users of food banks are disabled people or people with long-term health conditions. So we do know that disabled people have been amongst the most adversely affected by austerity policies. And this is borne out by the government's own advisors, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, because they've done what's called a cumulative impact assessment of the consequences of austerity with all the different demographic groups, and found disabled people to feature one amongst the worst.
So our society is treating disabled people, the worst of all the groups within our society are being treated.
Yes, single-parent mothers are also very badly affected.
Well, the single mothers, single parents are with children are actually, according to the guest we had on last week, getting only half of what they actually need. Would you be able to compare that to disabled people?
Yes. The disabled people are around, I believe it's around £5,000 to £6,000 worse off per annum. Now, how that compares with single-parent mothers, I'm not entirely sure. But the cumulative impact assessment does compare these groups. But of course, what we don't really want is that comparison is not really necessary. What's equally appalling is that both groups are affected.
Yeah, exactly. The line's not great, Philip. See if you can make sure you're not covering the mic part of the phone, would you? I'm grateful to you because you've taken time out from an event you're at to talk to us. The Alston inquiry went into some depth as to not just the suffering of disabled people in poverty in Britain, but how the rollout of universal credit is going to affect them. Say something about that, would you?
Yes. Universal credit was designed in a way that was going to penalise disabled people from the start, because they abolished the severe disability premium and the enhanced disability premium at the time of the design of the system. And also the amount of time it takes for disabled people, indeed anybody else, to get a universal credit payment is extremely distressing to many people. Many people are already in severe debt and can't face the weight to get their payments. And of course, they still have to go through a work capability assessment.
Yeah.
And the work capability assessment was never been an examination of why they come up with the descriptors that they have. There's no evidence-based descriptors. So we've seen no transparency with that system. We've never seen any test of its fairness.
People who are declared fit for work have died in very significant numbers. Disabled people have committed suicide in significant numbers. It sounds like absolute hell in the disability community. What sort of feeling do you get in your position developing policy for disability rights? Getting worse, staying as bad, or getting any better?
Well, we don't know. In one sense, we don't know. But what does happen is we're regaled on a daily basis with some of the horror stories. A person starved himself to death because he couldn't get the benefits in David Cameron's own constituency. So we've seen some real high-profile incidents and stories and tragedies, and clearly we're extremely worried that the length of the rollout of universal credit could make this all worse.
Well, it doesn't seem likely that it's going to make it better. What are your main demands as a group? What are you calling for the government or any government to do instead?
Well, we would wish to see the universal credit, the way it is reduced. We wish to see the work capability assessment truly reformed, and not just the procedures, but we actually look at the basis by which they arrive at their decisions in the work capability assessment. And we would like to see restoration of the enhanced, the severe disability premium and the enhanced disability premium, because especially children, disabled children, are being penalised under the current universal credit system.
Now, were you in this position before austerity, before 2010?
Well, my own experience of being in disability politics is around 12 years.
So you're in a good position to say how the years of austerity, now 8 years of austerity, have impacted on your sector.
Yes, undoubtedly people have become have fallen into destitution. People are severely impoverished, and for many people's lives have become stories of personal tragedy. That is undoubtedly the case. What we're worried about is the Prime Minister's been telling the rest of the country that austerity is going to come to an end. But for disabled people who encounter the welfare reform system, that's never going to be, because the reforms have been implemented in law, and anybody who makes a claim for a benefit will in effect be doing so under austerity forever.
Philip, I'm really grateful to you. I know you had to step out to take this call. Philip Connolly, Policy and Development Manager for Disability Rights UK. If you're a disabled person, if your benefits have been cut, then call us 0344 499 1000. That's the number to ring. You ring us, we ring you back, so it needn't cost you more than a penny or two. You can, of course, email through the website at talkradio.co.uk. You can text the word talk and then your message to 87222, but that'll cost you 25 pence plus normal sending charges, or you can tweet me for free at George Galloway at Talk Radio. We're going to talk more about Manchester in the third hour, and also anything that you want me to talk about. So let me know by any of those means what it is that you'd like me to talk about. Anyway, this is from Peter. I've tried to refrain from commenting on the Manchester bombing simply because I don't like constantly berating the intelligence services. But the hierarchy of MI6 should have kept their nose out of trying to overthrow Gaddafi. They financed, trained and armed the very people that carried out the bombing in Manchester. When will we learn to stop interfering in foreign politics, to stop causing misery as in Syria, Iraq and eastern Ukraine? Concentrate on trying to make peace and friends rather than more enemies and death. Their interference will constantly come back to bite them. That's from Peter, and a very powerful injunction there. Every country needs an intelligence service. Every country needs an accountable, efficient, competent and well-resourced intelligence service. I'm not against our intelligence services. I just want them to be a bit more intelligent. Now, I explained earlier my views on the Manchester Arena atrocity, the mass murder of young children, young people, their parents, who'd gone to see Ariana Grande. An evening of fun and joy was brought to a lacerating end, a devastating end, by a piece of filth. I can hardly bring myself to mention his name, Abadi, who blew himself up in a way that was intended to kill the maximum number of innocent people. The House of Commons Intelligence and Security Committee, in a devastating report this week, criticised the intelligence and police failures in that particular case. I'm with the texter, Peter, from earlier, the emailer, just before the break. I don't want to blame the intelligence services as such, and I certainly don't want to blame the police. I think the problem is far deeper than that. We ought to have been able to keep track on this particular mass murderer, child killer. That's obvious and has been accepted by the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, and I think by the police themselves, the security services don't speak generally, but I'm sure they could not demur from the particular criticisms in this case. But I believe that the entire policy, and not just towards Libya, was the actual cause of this atrocity. We should not have hired the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group to assassinate Gaddafi. We should not, when that failed, have given them safe haven in Britain. We should not have allowed them to concentrate as a very large cell of thousands of people in Manchester. And given that we did all those things, we should never have taken the control orders off of them, which Gordon Brown's government did. Even more, we should not have given their passports back to them so that they could travel freely on British passports to and from Libya. Whilst a revolution was going on, whilst the place was crawling with ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the alphabet soup of Islamist extremism, where they were going there, learning how to kill, learning how to use guns, weapons of all kinds, explosives of all kinds, and then come back to Manchester Airport without so much as a by your leave, without so much as a question as to who they were fraternizing with and what deadly skills they had picked up there. So this policy was deeply flawed, and even worse, it's a policy that has been continued in many other places. Don't make me tell you again about the day I was trapped in a lift with William Hague, when I told him, "You've been wrong before. In fact, you've been wrong all your life. But you've never been insane before. And I'm telling you that the policy of putting knives in the hands of people who are cutting throats and chopping off heads and cutting out hearts and eating them in Syria can only come back and bite us. We're still doing it. We're doing it in many parts of the world. And it's profoundly misplaced. And if you do that, in a way, it doesn't matter how many MI6 and MI5 men you've got. It doesn't matter even how intelligent they are. They could all be James Bonds. You could root out every last Austin Powers out of the intelligence services. You still wouldn't be able to keep a lid on the serpents that you had yourselves conjured forth. Now, let me give you my view on the 4-minute trial without a lawyer of Matthew Jennings in the United Arab Emirates. Matthew Hedges, forgive me. Thank you, Tama. Matthew Hedges, a Durham University student, was charged with spying, for whom is not exactly clear. It's less clear now than it was to me a couple of hours ago. But he was charged with spying. But his trial only lasted 4 minutes, and he had no lawyer. Therefore, it's null and void. Therefore, it's a decision made by a kangaroo court in a banana emirate, which we created for our own selfish purposes and which wouldn't last 2 weeks without us and the United States military, political and diplomatic backing. And therefore, it cannot be allowed to stand. Matthew must be returned to Britain without delay. And if he is not, there must be severe consequences. We have to stop treating these petrol stations with flags as if they were actually independent sovereign states. They are not. They are creatures of us, with rulers picked by us. And without us, they couldn't survive. Now, it's open to the UAE to tell us who Matthew was spying for, maybe I'd believe them. But if you don't tell us who he was spying for, and you give him life in jail in 4 minutes without even the ability to defend himself, then you are an illegitimate, I don't want to use the other word for illegitimate, government. And we're not prepared to have our citizens treated in this way. I just make this point. If this had happened to a British citizen in Moscow, say Doogie, confused of Moscow, Doogie, from the Black Country. If this had happened to him, if he'd got a 4-minute trial without a lawyer and got sentenced to life imprisonment, some of you might cheer. But I wouldn't, because I cannot tolerate our people being treated in such a way, or any people, anywhere, being treated in such a way. But you could be sure of one thing. The response from the British government would have been a bit more robust than so far it's been to the United Arab Emirates, which I should tell you once had a very noble ruler, the late and great Sheikh Zayed. I'm afraid his sons haven't lived up to their father's great legacy. Mind you, maybe we should expropriate Manchester City, take it off them. There's an idea. I'm prepared to run it. Tell me what you think. 0344 499 1000. There's my 2 issues for the final hour. You may have others. Damien, for example, says, never mind mundane subjects like Brexit and landlords. As half an Irishman and a football fan, what do you think of Mick McCarthy getting a second crack at the Ireland job? Well, I loved Mick McCarthy. He was a great player for us at Celtic. And I like him as a man. I think he's a real man. A real man. Capital R, capital M. But I can't help thinking it's going backwards to make him the manager of Ireland again. I can't help thinking that the man that walked out of, was it Ipswich, was it Norwich, is necessarily the best man that you could have got in the marketplace at this time. But if he gets the job, of course, I'll be singing Soldiers Are We along with him at the next international. Sorry, Damien, if that's an upsetting reply. Bob says, we need a Mueller-type investigation into Moscow Doogie. This is a foreign intervention into British politics. If anybody sees a man in a Oshunka driving a Moskvich with snow on his boots in or around the Birmingham area, ring Dan Hodges immediately. Bob, Justice, that is the tweet of the night by some considerable distance. John says on the SMS, Tory party love of outsourcing and privatisation leads to poverty and death. Ryan says, my biggest gripe with Brexit, the gall of the likes of Anna Soubry trying to reincarnate themselves as liberal. She voted 51 times to reduce disability benefits, voted 14 times for the bedroom tax. Pro-EU Tories equal wolves in sheep's clothing. And this one, an SMS from Karim, says, George, my brother is disabled, and if it were not for my parents fully supporting him, I'm not sure how he would survive. It's disgusting that we do not look after those in society who need it most. It's not socialism. It's not about welfare. It's about ensuring that the most fundamental societal values are protected. We wasted billions on a war that should never have been fought. I myself am a student volunteer who helps disabled people apply for universal credit, which is not working. And if people heard the stories, heard what the disabled have gone through in this country, there would be riots in the street. Thank you, Karim. A very powerful SMS indeed. By the way, we spent, between us and the Americans, $6 trillion, $6 trillion on the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq and Libya. $6 trillion. Get your head round that. Another SMS from the very, very clever man, Samson in Kilmarnock. He says societies can be judged by their treatment of the most vulnerable. Neoliberalism is particularly harsh on disabled people. In addition to cuts to benefits, disabled people find their status commodified by the private companies which financially benefit from finding them fit to work. They also pay the price for failing infrastructure, which does not meet their needs. For example, paying for taxis when privatised bus services fail them, and have to shell out for private care where services are absent. This is doubly cruel, as disabled people face significant barriers to employment in a market which is already difficult for non-disabled people. What a powerful, powerful couple of SMSs. Another one, George, following my previous text, I wanted to add one more significant barrier which austerity is posing for disabled people, which gets little mention. Local authorities have faced unprecedented cuts, with some budgets slashed by up to almost 70% since 2010. As a consequence, councils are less able to afford adaptive equipment, which enables disabled people to live in their homes with maximum independence. Where people can't pay for their own equipment, we all pay on the back end by way of increased and easily avoidable referrals to costly crisis intervention services. Very well made point, Samson. And Sir Ravix Furhon, what a wonderful name, Sir Ravix Furhon, says, compare the campaign for Scottish independence with that of Catalan independence and you'll get your answer. I'm not sure that I know what that means. Steve Hewitt says, George, I hope we don't make the same hapless mistake with the arrival of many Iranians via stolen boats and dinghies onto our shores, or will we let them stay without proper checks? The Libyan case was different, Steve. They didn't arrive and not get proper checks. They were enlisted into our private army of jihadists. Tony Paxton says, council houses sold off to their tenants. They sell them on to private landlords, developers, who triple the original council rent. People desperate for a home pay high rents, but often in low-paid jobs. If they lose their job or their benefits, they become homeless. Now, Peter is in Coatbridge. He wants to talk about Gibraltar. They speak of little else in Coatbridge, Peter.
Yes, George. How are you?
I'm good. Nice to hear you again.
Yes, it's about the double standards of Spain. I mean, they've got a colony in Africa, Amelia, and they've got a foreign legion, by God, in Africa.
Yeah.
I think it's about double standards.
Yeah, well, nobody's disputing that. Is Morocco asking for these two enclaves to be returned to it? I'm not sure that it is.
I'm not really sure, but
that would be a qualitative difference.
That
would, I mean, I'm against all colonies everywhere, but that would be a qualitative difference. If Morocco does not want these territories returned to it, maybe it does, I may be wrong, but in the back of my mind, I have a suspicion that it doesn't. The point is, though, what's our case for holding on to a rock in Spain?
I agree with you there, but it's just the sort of double standards of Spain when they have their own. And
indeed, and the fascist coup was launched from those very Moroccan territories that you mentioned. I can't pronounce the first one, but Melita and Cuela, is it?
Is it Melia? I'm not really sure.
Gibraltar means Jabal Tariq, of course, in Arabic. These were the mountains of Tariq. This name comes from the period in which all of the southern part, at least, of Spain and Portugal, for that matter, were part of the Muslim Empire.
Yeah. Well, as for colonisation, I think the only decent coloniser was Stamford Raffles. He seemed to be a decent chap. He says you should only colonise places if you want to improve the lot of the people. And he started Singapore.
Yes. It's been pointed out to me by Tamar that Portugal's name is from the Arabic, and so is the Algarve. The Algarve is the Algarve, which means the West.
Oh, very interesting. You're very knowledgeable, George, aren't you?
Well, between me and Tamar, we know everything. Thank you very much indeed, Peter. Let's hear from Michael.
Good evening, George. Michael Schooler here.
Hi, Michael. Nice to hear from you.
Thank you very much. Firstly, thanks very much for taking the time to speak with me this evening.
You're welcome.
Secondly, I have commuted between London and Glasgow for the last 18 years, and I have sat next to you many a time on planes,
trains, and automobiles. Yes,
exactly. And what your listeners should know is, whilst I'm a Tory, you're an incredible gentleman. People from your opposition parties treat some of the air hostesses and men of the crew in a different way, and you've always been an absolute gentleman. And that's why it comes on to my next point. I'm a Conservative, very proud of it, but I'm also a Democrat, and I really enjoy listening to you, hence why I dial into this meeting or this radio show. And I think what I want to ask you is, I'm 46 and I look at politics now and I'm slightly disappointed, and you've been in politics a longer time.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the theories I've come to get to is people who are from a working class background, such as myself, who have come up through the ranks, we are no longer about to be represented in politics. And let me explain that. I think there's an issue with politics now. I'd be really interested in your view, which is we are not bringing people through, the right people through to politics. We've got into a position where we think politicians are paid far too much, where that means that those people from a background where they have wealth can go into politics. Those of us who have done well but don't have wealth behind us means that we possibly can't. And I think, looking at politics just now, we don't have the right breadth or depth of quality politicians, because we're not making the payments to the people that give up their careers to go into politics enough. And I know it's a controversial
it is controversial, but it's not a crazy point, Michael. I always said that MPs should be paid twice what they earn, and we should have half as many of them as we currently do. And that, therefore, wouldn't cost us a penny more. And the members of Parliament should be properly resourced, like senators, for example, are in the United States, where, Ted Kennedy would have 18, 20, maybe more people working in his office, and he would be paid quite a lot more than an MP's salary. The point that you make is undoubtedly true. I was thinking about this, funnily enough, just the other day. If you were a successful businessman or woman, for example, you could expect earnings, high six-figure earnings, and maybe even seven-figure earnings. And you wouldn't have to declare it in a public register, and you wouldn't have to face the chop every 4 years or 5 years at a general election. So you'd actually need your head examined to leave your successful business career and become an MP. That, I think, is one of the reasons why the Conservative benches are now particularly threadbare so far as talent is concerned. The Labour benches are threadbare of a different category of people.
Well, they don't have you, George.
Well, that's very nice of you to say, but
I'm not doing that.
They don't have. Well, that's kind. They don't have working class people who were not educated at university, and both of those are describing me. When I entered Parliament more than 30 years ago, the Labour ranks were full of people who had left school, like me, in their teens, went straight into the world of work, became trade union activists and so on. All of that is gone. The Labour MPs now are overwhelmingly people who've left school, gone to a university, frequently the best universities, got involved in student politics, and then became factotums of one kind or another inside the political system as advisors or parliamentary aides and so on.
Agreed.
And that's what the Labour benches are stuffed with. And we're really suffering from that. I don't think I know it's a temptation when one reaches a certain age to look back on a golden era, but I honestly think it's the truth that today's Parliament is a dwarfish Parliament compared to the one that I entered, which was itself less than the one that gone before. I always sum it up this way, Michael. Harold Wilson had in his cabinet James Callaghan, Dennis Healy, Tony Benn, Michael Foot, Anthony Crossland, Richard Crossman, Barbara Castle, Judith Hart, Shirley Williams. I could go on. Every one of them could have become the Prime Minister, and you wouldn't have been surprised. In fact, most of them were trying to become the Prime Minister. But if you look at today's cabinets, talk about pygmies. You get people resigning from jobs you never even knew they had.
Well, I totally agree with you, but how do we get back to a position where somebody with my beliefs in politics, which is different to yours, but I respect what you say, and I'm actually very interested in what you say, especially around the Middle East. We don't need to go into this just now, but we can have a discussion. We can appreciate our differences, and we don't have to do it in a yaboo politics way. We can play like tennis. I have my position, I'll explain it. You have your position, explain it. Whereas just now, it seems to be whoever shouts the loudest, and that just becomes very disappointing as an observer.
It's not even very intelligent shouting by and large. Anyway, Michael, I'm grateful to you for your kind words and your intelligent arguments. What do you think? Tell me, 0344 499 1000. Let's take the next call. Raymond on a mobile. Go ahead, Raymond.
Oh, hello, George.
Hello.
I'm glad to bump into you again, even if it's over the airwaves.
Oh, Raymond. Oh, it's yourself. Very nice to hear from you.
In Bonnie Dundee, George.
Yes.
I'd like to make a couple of comments about the furore over the Leave vote.
Yes.
And Mayhem's drastic record in negotiations.
She's not much of a negotiator. She wouldn't have done well in the Timex negotiations.
I was going to say that, George. You could take any short shoot for the Timex. We'd do a better job of negotiating than she's done.
I think that's absolutely correct. If you go into a negotiation and it's quite clear to the people on the other side of the table that you're actually prepared to accept however bad an offer they make because downing tools and leaving the place just isn't an option, you're not going to get much of an outcome.
You won't. You'll get no outcome. Well, one that isn't satisfactory to you or the people you represent. But I voted Leave. And what really stood out in my mind since the days we joined the EEC in January 73 was the loss of 8 million high-skill, high-wage manufacturing jobs in the British economy to be replaced over that period from then till now with millions of low-wage, low-skill jobs.
Yep.
When I voted Leave in the polling booth, there was no caveat. There was nothing that said, "Are you voting Leave only if we get a deal?" That wasn't there. It was Remain or Leave.
Yeah.
And now these faux left-wingers, supposed liberals, supposed Democrats, that are describing people like me, 17.4 million of us, as racists, thick as mince. We didn't know what we were voting for. We didn't vote to put ourselves on the brew. We didn't vote to close down our workplaces. That middle-class, snobbish attitude to working-class people who, for once in their life, had a chance to say to the authorities, "Get lost. We're not taking your advice. We know what EU membership has done to our families and our communities, and we are voting to leave." And most people who voted to leave thought we would have left the next day on the 24th of June 2016. Yet here we are, 27 months later, and the authorities are gerrymandering to deny that biggest working class mandate. And the faux left are carrying on that the European Union was a liberating force. A liberating force.
And yet, Raymond, I couldn't put that case better than you did, and I'm not going to try, but I just put this to you. We've been hearing all night about the misery that our poor people, up to a fifth of our entire population, are living in. We're looking at the post-industrial dereliction of what used to be the workshop of the world. We're looking at mass underemployment, 0 hours contracts, insecure work, low wages, wages that have been frozen, indeed cut over the last 8 years. And all of this whilst we were in the EU. Just exactly how did they expect people in Britain, living in this Britain, to be grateful enough to the EU to choose to remain in it?
That's right, George. And all of that happened because we were in the European Union and we kept elected neoliberal governments like Thatcher's. And Thatcher worked hand in hand with the EU Commission to propagate those policies that interest the European capitalist class and their British counterparts. And you're right. We have suffered decades, service cuts, wage freezes and poverty, while the profits of business, specifically the transnational corporations, have surged. They've now got the highest profits recorded in the history of British capitalism. And you didn't fight these people by begging with them. You fight them by pissing them down and fighting them, battling with them seriously. And that's one thing the movement hasn't done since that magnificent Leave vote. We've been led by donkeys. We've been led by people who have obscurated, confiscated, who have confused the people of this country. Keir Starmer, the Labour spokesperson, should be sacked. If I was Corbyn, I would have him sacked. His 6 tests were 6 tests to keep us in the European Union. Corbyn himself is aware of the political situation vis-a-vis the Remainers who support Labour and the Leavers who support Labour. And he's obviously in quite a difficult position. But at the end of the day, our MPs are elected by us to represent us. And they should vote down May's deal in the next week or so. They should vote for a no deal or to leave the thing empty until we leave on the 29th of March next year. And after that, then they can start discussing what's left of the European Union, a future arrangement between Britain and themselves. And I've always been of the opinion, George, we would never get a deal. You can't satisfy the European Commissions who represent transnational corporations and big finance capital. You can't satisfy them and at the same time give the ordinary people of Britain the kind of deal they voted for on the 23rd. So,
very powerful, Raymond. Thank you very much indeed for that. Wonderful Dundee accent, an industrial worker, a shop steward, a militant from one of my previous lives. Thank you for that, Raymond. Albert Trigg says austerity for the many, resulting in homelessness or even death for many disabled people, while the first £92 million F-35 fighter jets arrive in the UK as part of a £2.5 billion deal from the US.